Hi, Steven Spielberg. How are you doing on this lovely day of November 1982? What's that? Your film E.T. came out and is doing really well. And now you want a video game made. But you've only got 5 weeks to make it. But you'll pay me in advance. As long as I promise not to spend it all on cocaine and hookers. Of course I won't. This isn't the 70s, you know. Hi, Steven. How can I help? What video game? Oh,
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm Josh Strife-Hayes, and this is Retro Review, a series where we take a look back and replay some of the best, some of the worst, and some of the strangest video games of all time. Drop a like on the vid and sub to the channel for more gaming content, and ring the bell so you don't miss a single video. A massive thank you to my Patreon supporters and Twitch subs who make all my content possible. Links to both of these are in the description below. Today we're playing E.T. the Extraterrestrial for the Atari 2600, and not only did I go back and finish this game, I've discovered a system for beating it super easily, and I'll share it with you in the video. Now, this game is legendarily bad. People often blame the fall of Atari entirely on this game. Some even say the potential collapse of the video game industry in the mid to early 80s can be traced back to how this game was received. There have been urban legends of one-man development and unsold copies being buried in a Mexican landfill. So let's go back, separate fact from fiction, and see just how bad E.T. really is. If you've read or watched any worst games ever list, chances are E.T. was somewhere near the top, if not number one. But why? What made this game so phenomenally bad? Because E.T. released for the Atari 2600, and because the Atari 2600 is such a simple console, you can play this game fully emulated online right now without needing to download it. I'll drop a link in the description in case you want to give it a go yourself. Right, E.T. for the Atari. Let's play this. You play as E.T. You're dropped onto Earth and have to move from screen to screen and find 3 pieces of a magical space telephone in order to call your spaceship to come and pick you up. That is the entire plot. It's not hard to see how this story might have been written.
Hi, Steven. Yeah, I don't actually have time to watch this film, so why don't you give me a really quick rundown of what happens? There's an alien. He phones home. And there's a kid there. Does he fall into a pit at all? He doesn't. Well, that's a real shame. That's a real shame.
The Atari 2600 only had an 8-way directional joystick and a single button, so the controls are extremely basic, but the designer did find a novel way of making that single button do quite a few things. We'll look at the power zones later. You move E.T. with the joystick, you hold the button while moving to run. Doing absolutely anything in the game, running or performing actions of any kind, will reduce your score at the bottom. Once this score reaches 0, you die. It's essentially your energy. When you die, Elliot, the kid from the film, will come and revive you, but he'll only do this twice as you've only got 2 lives. And when you're revived, your points go back to 1500, not 9999 like they were at the start. The game only has 6 possible screens: the forest you start in, Washington at the bottom, and then 4 pit screens. On the 4 pit screens, if any part of your sprite touches a pit, you'll fall in. When in a pit, press the button to extend your neck, then hold up to slowly levitate out of the pit. Very important note, once out of a pit, you must move to the side, because if you move up or down, you'll just immediately fall back into the pit again. Sometimes in the pit, you'll find one of the magical telephone pieces. There are only 3, and the pits are the only places to find them. The pits they are in are random every time you restart the game, and the only way you'll know is by falling in. If you're lucky, you'll find a dead flower in a pit. Press the button while standing next to it to revive the flower, and you'll gain 1 extra life. There's only 1 flower per game. That's the core gameplay, but you've got 3 things that make it interesting: enemies, candy, and power zones. And these all depend on which game mode you choose to play. You see, E.T. has 3 different game modes. You can change the game mode at the title screen by switching a button on the Atari console. Changing the game mode essentially changes the difficulty. 1 is hard, 2 is medium, and 3 is beginner. Let's examine game mode 1, so 2 and 3 make sense later. While walking around the game's 6 screens, you can be attacked by 2 enemies. The first is a scientist who will pick you up and carry you off to a cage on the bottom screen. Once he drops you off, you can walk out and carry on playing. He's really more of a nuisance than an actual problem. The second is an FBI agent. If this guy bumps into you, he will steal a phone piece from you and place it back into a random pit. If you're not carrying any phone pieces, he'll take all your candy. The FBI doesn't seem too concerned that you are a literal alien. They are, however, very worried about your phone and your sweets.
Come in base, this is Strife. Got eyes on the target. Suspect is a 3-foot green alien. Doesn't appear to be armed. Wait, strike that. He's got a phone handset and a bag of Maltesers. I'm going in.
This guy is a major problem, because finding those phone pieces takes a while, and losing one, then having to find it again, takes up so much energy. But what about the candy pieces I just mentioned? While walking around, you can find these pixels. They're candy. Walking over one picks it up. Having more candy with you at the end of the game increases your high score. You can also use them in certain power zones. So let's look at those. Top center of the screen, you'll see an icon. This is the power zone you're currently standing in. This changes based on where you're standing. One single screen can have a load of different power zones on it, and they're random every time you restart the game. Pressing the button while standing still activates whatever your current power zone is. Let's have a quick look at the 9 different power zones and what they do. If it's an arrow, you'll instantly teleport to the next screen in that direction. This is good for escaping enemies, but your relative position on the screen remains the same, which means you can quite easily teleport yourself into a pit, which is time consuming. The question mark makes any phone pieces in any pits on the screen you're currently on flash, so hunting them is a lot quicker. The E, with 3 lines coming out of it, is a face shouting. This calls Elliot. You'll give him all the candy you've got, then at the end you'll gain bonus points for each piece you gave him. Plus, if you give him 9 or more pieces, he'll chase away any enemy NPCs on the screen, then leave to find a phone piece, returning a few seconds later with it. The building with columns sends all humans on the screen back to their main building in Washington. That's this screen. Elliot goes home, the science guy goes to the top right, and the FBI guy goes to the top left. The arrow with a line under it only appears when you're in a pit and makes you extend your neck so you can levitate out. The egg-looking thing with a dot in the centre means you eat a piece of candy, which are meant to be Reese's Pieces to tie in with the film. Eating candy refills a small amount of energy. The Space Invader icon can only be used when you've collected all 3 phone bits, and this is the call the main ship home to you action. The crosshair-looking square is where the mothership will land once you've called it. This zone is always in the forest somewhere, and you must be standing here when the ship lands, otherwise you will miss it. And finally, the smile is regrowing the flower you find down the pit. On game mode 1, all these mechanics are present. On mode 2, you don't have the scientist, but you do have the FBI agent, and on game 3, there are no human enemies. Now you know the entire game, let's play it. Playing on game mode 3 is basically just a hunt for the telephone pieces while conserving energy, and as long as you know that you can use the question mark power zones to find where they are, you don't actually need to fall down any pits at random. You can hunt them down. Once you've got all 3 pieces, find the Space Invader power zone, call the mothership home, and now return to the forest at the start of the game. It's always at the top of the screen. Find the landing zone, which is the square, then stand still. If you're not in the landing zone, the ship leaves without you. I finished the game in 4.5 minutes. There is 0 challenge here, but I have discovered some interesting mechanics. This is the system I mentioned in the beginning, and it's all about the map layout. While it might not be realistic, it is consistent and understandable. You start in a forest. Let's put that screen at the top. Then, when you move down, you'll be placed into one of 4 screens with pits. Moving down again will place you into the 3 building map, which is basically meant to be Washington from the film. While you're in a pit screen, moving left or right always moves you to another pit screen. They exist as a strip. And moving up from any pit screen, always, no matter where you are, sends you back to the forest, while moving down from any pit screen always sends you to Washington. Think of it as a strip of 4 pits in the middle with the forest above and Washington below. Then leaving the forest by the top, left or right always loops you back round to a specific pit map. The same is true for leaving Washington from the sides or the bottom. On screen now, I've organised the complete map to show all of the connections. This might sound complex, but it actually means you never ever have any reason to visit Washington. You start in the forest, move down a single screen to get to the strip of pits, then run left and right until you've got all the pieces, then go up again. That's literally it. Knowing this, I tried to complete the game as fast as I could using the question mark power zone on each screen to find the phone pieces as quickly as possible. I finished the game in 2 minutes and 20 seconds on Game Mode 3. That's without any of the human enemies. But I mean, that's easy. It's just searching. There's no FBI agent and no scientist. So let's go to Game Mode 1 and 2. Let's bring them back. Game Mode 2, with just the FBI agent, is so much harder. He follows you so fast, and sending him back to Washington only ever gives you a few seconds because he's back quickly. And Game Mode 1, with both enemies, oddly, is actually easier. So the scientist is annoying but bearable. He just carries you off. But the FBI agent stealing your phone piece? That's irritating. Because you need to go back and find the question mark power zone again on every screen and check if they're in a pit, or dash around to avoid him. And he, unlike you, can just walk over the pits. So when you're playing on Game Mode 1 and you've got both human enemies active, the scientist and the FBI, because of the limited Atari 2600 processing power, you can only have one enemy on the screen at a time. So if you get the FBI agent, just change screens or send him away until you get the scientist. Then run rings around him while you look for stuff. Also, sometimes you'll send enemies away by using the go away power zone and they'll just glitch and get stuck on the bottom of the screen, which means you're completely safe as long as you don't touch them. I finished Mode 1 with both enemies in 4 minutes. You've got to make sure when you get picked up by the ship there are no enemies on screen, otherwise it won't land. I like to think this is because they see the humans and get scared off, but it's actually because the Atari 2600 couldn't process the spaceship landing and the enemy sprite moving at the same time. Now graphically the game is super basic. The 2600 was an 8-bit console, but as I've always said, style matters more than graphics, and while the colours are blocky, the design of E.T. himself, with the long crooked neck, is definitely memorable. And while there's not much movement, mainly the human NPCs chasing you, you really do have to appreciate the smoothness of Elliot's walking animation at the end of the game. This loop, walking around the house, is super smooth for an 8-bit game. For music, the title screen does have a very compressed MIDI version of the E.T. theme. It's recognisable enough and not awful compared to some themes of the time. It's not too fast or too slow, and the pitch is balanced well. In-game, the movement sounds don't get too grating, the levitating noise is fine, it's just fine. Musically, it's not annoying. If anything, it's completely forgettable. I'm writing this review while playing the game, and even I can't remember what the sound effects sound like. As for gameplay, it's dull. There's no denying that. Walking from screen to screen is monotonous. Levitating from pits does get old if you don't know the question mark power zone trick, and unless you've got the manual to read or a guide to watch, you'll be extremely confused on what you're actually meant to do. Thankfully, you can still find the manual online. Some kind soul has converted it to text and ASCII art. Bless you, whoever did this. That being said, the use of power zones to turn the single button into 9 actions is inspired. It took the limitations of the Atari's joystick and found a way to be creative with them. And being chased by the FBI guy, having to run away and dodge the pits, can almost get close to being, dare I say this, fun. So why does this game get so much hate? Well, let's look at the journey to make it. This whole game was made in 5 weeks by one guy, Howard Scott Warshaw. You might assume Howard had no idea what he was doing, but actually quite the opposite. Howard made the very well received Yar's Revenge only a few months earlier, so the issue wasn't designer skill, it was just time. While people can make a fun indie game in 24 hours now, back in 1982 game design was a much longer, much more labour-intensive process, with lines of code being typed out manually each and every time, and an alpha or beta version and player feedback not really being a thing. This was one guy's best attempt at making a video game in 5 weeks with very limited resources. Now, if this were a simple standalone game with no connections to anything, it would have come and gone without much fanfare, but it wasn't. It was the official video game of one of the most successful films ever, E.T. The hype built around this game was insane. The New York Times reported that video games based on successful films would become an increasingly profitable source for game development. It was the most anticipated Christmas gift, and you know what? It actually sold amazingly. It was one of the top 15 games of December 1982 and January 1983. It sold 1.5 million copies, which for the time was insane. But then, after the initial hype and the buying rush, the reviews came in, and critics absolutely bashed this game. It was described as dull, inane, for the kids, difficult to play, primitive, and ultimately all the reviews settled on one word: disappointing. Reviewers criticised the pits, saying how the process of falling into and levitating out was needlessly repetitive, and how you'd often fall back into them while trying to get out, and how it was impossible to know where they were. And you know what? Those reviewers were wrong. They weren't wrong to say the game was bad. It is, but they're wrong about the pits, because you don't need to fall into a pit. You can use the question mark power zone to find which pit has a piece in it. Then, once you've levitated out, as long as you move sideways, not up or down, you'll never fall back in. The one complaint they didn't mention that actually is valid, however, is some screens have pits on the very edge, and moving onto those screens from that edge position will make you fall down one immediately. So the game was hyped, designed and developed within an impossibly short time frame, then released to the strange juxtaposition of financial success yet critical failure. There was even a rumour that Atari had so many unsold E.T. cartridges, potentially in the millions, they buried them in a landfill in New Mexico. The truth of this rumour is, it did happen, but not in the millions. Atari did have a load of unsold cartridges from various games, and following the ultimate failure of E.T., they did dump a load of stock in a New Mexico landfill. Many years later, a documentary actually dug through the landfill to try and confirm the rumours, and they did indeed find a load of old Atari games. This game gets a lot of hate, and many gamers are quick to crown it as the worst game ever, but honestly, once you've got the map clear in your head, understand the power zones and what they do, and how to avoid losing the phone, it's not nearly as bad as everyone says it is. It's super short. A 4-minute run is ridiculous, even on the supposed hardest difficulty. Because of the absolute infamy around this game, I was expecting to struggle for hours, but no, actually it's quite simple once you learn what it wants. There is no doubt E.T. is a bad game. Starting with the immense hype, the massive financial investment in it, and the ultimate critical failure, E.T. would see consumers complain and make video game companies extremely wary of investing in large-scale projects in the future. The whole ordeal definitely damaged Atari and their brand. They will forever have to live with the disaster that was E.T. tied to their name, and the video game industry as a whole was now much more cautious about taking on a movie tie-in game. But I see E.T. as a warning. A warning that just because a project has the name of a famous person or branding of a famous film doesn't mean it will be good. The actual content needs to be good too. A good designer with a good film tie-in don't matter if the final product is crap. You need to give talented people the time they need to create something high quality, and don't assume your consumers will love something just because you slap a popular film mascot on it. Of course, this warning hasn't been heeded by the games industry, and they release movie tie-in game year after year, and they're all crap, and they all make lots of money. I'd actually encourage you to check out the link below and go and play E.T., because it's a piece of video game history, and if you're going to say with confidence it's the worst game ever, you probably should play it. It will only take 5 minutes of your time, and then you can say to everyone you talk to, you have finished the worst game ever. I normally end these reviews with a humorous score out of 10, but honestly there's not that much in this game to find funny because there's not that much in this game. Ultimately, it's just not really that bad. So, I suppose we'll go with that. Not really that bad. Out of 10. Cheers for watching. Hope you've enjoyed revisiting E.T. with me. A massive thanks to all my supporters on Patreon and Twitch who make all my content possible. And if you've enjoyed the video, you can support the Patreon from only £1 a month. Let me know in the comments what game you want to see reviewed next, then check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter and Discord, and as always, have a great day.